I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On this week's episode, the Gators fall to 5-7 on the season after a disappointing second half in the swamp against FSU. A couple coaches are out, Raymond and Spencer. Free agency, that's what I guess we'll call it. Well, transfer portal action, we got retention, we got all kinds of rumors flying around, which Gators have already entered the name of the portal, and we'll try to stick to what's actually gone on and not all the rumors all over the place, and really which positions we would like to see Florida focus on this coming portal season. Will, man, you went down the game. I think you were in the Tampa area, St. Pete for the in-laws. You went home to Gainesville for the game. I saw some great videos with you and Max at the game. What the hell, Max? That's really all I got to say. You've been talking up Max and Max's undefeated record. Max, he was looking pretty good the first half. The second half,
we were up 12-0 right after the safety. He looks over at me and he goes, "I'm your good luck charm." And I go, "Wait a minute, you've never seen this team before, buddy. Like you've watched them on TV, but you haven't seen this team live. It's going to get hairy here some point in the future." And sure enough, Florida decided to let Florida State back into it. And I think right after he said that was the double reverse intentional grounding play that sort of was a microcosm of the entire season there for Florida. And you're right. It's funny because I left the stadium disappointed that Florida had lost. I kind of knew what I was going to write as I was walking out. I mean, I'm usually trying to crystallize that sort of stuff. I heard the Seminole War chant was echoing through the concourses in the swamps, which was really aggravating. Thankfully, we were able to drown it out a little bit with the "It's great to be a Florida Gator" chant. But I can't say that it was a bad time. I had so much fun with Max. He's so into it. So last year it was like it was just a constant parade of buying him food enough to where he'd like sit down and watch the game a little bit. And then he claimed he had a good time, but I didn't actually know whether he did. And this year he was into it, like chomping every play, high-fiving the frat boys next to him. He learned some words he probably shouldn't know while he was there as well. But it was a good time, and I'm glad we had that time because, those things make memories when they're 8, but I hope that still turns into, 3 hours that I can find with him when he's, 20, 30, 40 years old. And that'll be sort of one of our things to do.
That's awesome. I can remember watching football as a kid with my dad. Speaking of keeping your expectations in check there, pretty much any big play, you'd be celebrating, and my dad would be in the background, flag. Whether or not there was a flag, he would just do that just to get the crowd. And what? Everybody freak out. People who didn't watch the games normally would actually believe there was a flag. We started understanding pretty quickly. But then that like 15 to 20% of the time he was telling the truth. So it get a little confusing at times. You always check. So you just check for the flag. It trained me just to check for the flag before celebrating. So it's good to have dad level those expectations sometimes, Will. So you did good. It's good experience for Max there.
Well, and if nothing else, he's learning what it's like to lose a little bit. And that way, when the winning starts, it'll be sweeter, as opposed to some of these people who took their 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds to those games in 96 or 2006 or 2008. And you never thought it was going to end. And then all of a sudden it ends. And now the kids are just living through the pain. So at least Max sort of gets the losses to start with. And then when it turns into championships, he and I will be able to appreciate it. So that's the hope, at least.
Absolutely. Well, we'll have all offseason to dissect the pain. I'm thinking we'll do a little more detailed 2023 post-mortem season in review might be a friendlier term next week. But for this week, I'm calling this section, we'll say the Gators stayed within spitting distance of Florida State. Well, it was a close game. They really came out that first half. That first drive was extremely impressive from Max Brown. He had a throw on third down to the sideline to Eugene Wilson that Kirk Herbstreit was saying was one of the best throws he had seen all season. And it really was a real solid throw to Wilson, well-timed, right on the money, outside of the numbers. Pretty solid stuff from Max Brown. We saw him escape a little bit early, but you get to a 3rd and 3 on that first drive at the FSU 21. They go for a pop pass to ETN where Damon George was pulling on the left side and Hayden Hansen was blocking down, I believe, on Jared Verse. So that makes things a little difficult in the backfield there. We saw Jared Verse make another play on the night where he basically took George and used him as a stick to hit the quarterback with. later in the night. So that was pretty rough. Overall, the Gators did play well in the first half. They stuck with it. They really had some opportunities that they couldn't quite capitalize on. We saw that first drive, for example, ended up in a missed field goal from Trey Smack, who ended up 2 for 4 on the night. Max Brown ends the night 9 of 16, 86 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception. Johnson, 18 rushes for 107 yards and a TD. ETN, 10 rushes for 43 yards, and with 9 completions, not a whole lot to report in the receptions department there, Will. Conservative game plan at times, super aggressive at times. You mentioned it in your article, Will, in your post game.
Yeah, this is Billy Napier's calling card at this point. Is the only game I can remember him consistently sticking to a game plan where he didn't alternate between aggressive and conservative is the Tennessee game last year, where he was conservative the entire way through. I lauded him for it. I thought it was great. I thought he gave the team a better chance to win. This year, after a 3rd and 1 QB sneak doesn't get the first down, he decides to kick a field goal after burning a timeout. Depending upon what model you use to predict what that did to the winning percentage for Florida, the decision not to go for it on 4th and 1 from the opponent's 17 when you're up 7-0 and a 6.5 point underdog, somewhere between 3.5 and 3.8% less likely to win the game than if you'd gone for it. So
based on one play, just to be clear. On that,
based on that one play, you swing the odds that far. And it's easy to see why, right? I mean, they get the safety, they're up 12-0, everybody's really excited, but one touchdown completely changes the complexion. Florida State's right back in it. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you convert that 4th and 1, and most 4th and 1s get converted, and it wasn't even 1 yard, right? I mean, they QB sneaked before, so they were closer than a yard. Most 4th and 1s get converted. You turn that into a touchdown. You're up 14-0. If you get the same thing in terms of a safety, now you're up 16-0. That touchdown makes it 16-7. Maybe you're not feeling the pressure as bad when you come down after the big run for Montrell Johnson, where you miss the field goal. Maybe he makes that field goal. Let's say you're up 19-7 going into the half. You feel a lot better about where you are considering how Tate Rodemaker was playing in this game. But look, it still comes down to Florida had 3 explosive plays the entire night. They had a 24-yard pass to Hansen that leads to a touchdown. They had the 52-yard run for Johnson after the Florida State touchdown. That turns into a missed field goal. Then they had a 21-yard run for Johnson, and that turned into a field goal. Florida State had 4 explosive plays. They had a pass to Jaheim Bell. They had a pass to Keon Coleman. And then they had 2 runs for Trey Benson. The 2 runs for Benson came on the same touchdown drive, and then the pass to Bell and the pass to Coleman both resulted in touchdown drives. Florida State had 5 opportunities inside Florida's 40. They scored 24 points. Florida had 5 opportunities inside Florida State's 40. They scored 13 points on those drives. So that's the difference. The difference in the game is that Florida State put the ball in the end zone. Florida didn't put the ball in the end zone. And even the one where they did, they got a lot of help because the roughing the passer penalty was a little bit of
pretty generous.
I don't know what that was, but had that happened to Florida's defense, I might have hit the ceiling because I just assumed watching it live that he must have gotten face masked. Like I just looked at it and was like, did he grab him by the face mask? Like what happened? And no, he just apparently hit him too hard. I don't know what the call was there. So look,
you know my thoughts on that rule. That's
I know.
That's something that they really need to look at. There's a pretty unrealistic standard for defensive football nowadays.
Well, especially considering Max Brown is relatively mobile, and Florida State knows that coming in. But look, the game was actually closer than the final score indicates. Florida State 224 yards, averaged 3.9 yards per play. Florida, 232 yards, averaged 3.9 yards per play. The difference is that Florida made a bunch of penalties. They had the 2 pass interference penalties. One I think was bogus, but the other one on Devin Moore I thought was appropriate. They had the spitting penalty. Obviously, they had the penalty where they had great field position, but then they blocked a guy too long out of bounds and got a personal foul call on that one. They had the holding penalty that pushed back the field goal that eventually was missed. So all of those penalties that you put in, look, when you're at home, you expect the opposition to make the mistakes. You expect the opposition to have the false starts that kill them on a 3rd and 2 that turns it into a 3rd and 7, those sorts of things. Florida State made a couple of mistakes early on, but really it was a pretty clean game for the Seminoles. That's one of the reasons why they are where they are. And Florida's game, just like it's been all year long, was really dirtied up by all the different mistakes.
Yeah, we saw them early on move the ball a little bit against that FSU defense. I think that defense is real solid on the other side there. But at the end of the day, field goals, even, Smack missed a couple field goals. There's some chatter about that. Field goals weren't going to win this game. We had to put the ball in the end zone on a couple of those drives. That's why the 4th and 1 call that you focus on in your article, which check out Will's post-game article on readandreaction.com. If you haven't read it already, it's a great breakdown of the game. But you really needed to convert and score 6 on those drives anyway. So that's something where you weren't going to get a lot of opportunity on the night. So the few opportunities you had to score, you really needed to punch it in as much as possible on that.
It wasn't just the 4th and 1. It was after the 52-yard run by Montrell Johnson. They have 14 seconds left and about 22, 23 yards to go.
Mm-hmm.
And they hand it off to Montrell Johnson again. He runs for like 14 yards and they get a holding penalty. But even if they get that and they call a timeout, like, are they really going to then throw like a fade into the end zone or something? Like, it didn't feel like they were going to put the ball in Max Brown's hands to make a throw at that point. And if you're not, then you're just playing for field position and a field goal. Same thing. There was another drive later on where it was very similar, where it was like, hey, in fact, it was the drive where they scored the touchdown. They had 1st and goal from the 2, and that time they decided to drop back to pass. So to me, the interesting part is they sort of alternated between being conservative and being aggressive, and it just seemed odd to me. Like, pick one. You know what I mean? Like, if you think you need to be conservative and you're going to have to ground and pound them, then ground and pound them and really wear them out. Because, geez, Florida held the ball the entire first quarter. And then pretty much held the ball almost the entire first half until the spitting penalty really gave Florida State life. Again, though, that sort of goes back to the theme we've had all year, which is that Florida's team has been undisciplined in many, many, many different ways. And the spitting is just a further example of that, where you can't give the number 4 team in the country, even with their backup quarterback, you can't give that team just gift first downs. And Florida gave them gift first downs multiple times. And, when you do that, you're going to lose a game.
Now, Will, you were at the game, but on the replay when they showed the spitting, probably some of the most spit I've ever seen in my life. It was like a wall that came, like he went up and it like just is this entire wall of spit. It was unbelievable. But, it's just one of those things right now too, where anytime a Florida player does something dumb on the field like that, we're not far enough removed from the shoe toss, That was a big part of the conversation at the end of the Dan Mullen era, where he talked about lack of discipline, and Napier seems to run a good program in terms of guys seem to respect him off the field at least. But when you make a play like that, I thought you brought up a great example in your article about Kirby Smart during halftime of the Florida Georgia game, like where you got players who make an undisciplined mistake like that. They get heated in the moment and they choose to lash out rather than think of the team first. And we clearly haven't built that into the culture quite yet.
Well, and Kirby calls him out on the halftime interview on national TV, right? Like that's the thing is I wrote the word that what I wrote was that they respect him, that they play hard for him, but that they don't fear him. And I don't mean like fear him like an abusive father or something like that. I mean, they don't fear that there are going to be consequences when they do something stupid. We haven't even mentioned the targeting on the quarterback run by Rodemaker that extends the final drive for Florida State with Jadon Hill. Now, look, that's a tough one to hold up on. I get it. It's instinctual, all those sorts of things. But one of the things that I wrote about coming in the preview is that Rodemaker does not juke when he's a runner. He is not fast. He is not mobile. And so you don't need to go lead with your head. You can break down, wrap him up, and bring him to the ground. It's not like trying to tackle Jaden Daniels, where you better come in like a rocket because you're going to have to hit him when he's not expecting it, because he will juke you out of your shoes. That's not who Rodemaker is. And so, to me, that the lack of discipline sort of cascades its whole way down the field. And if I'm a player who's playing with discipline, I'm mad that these other guys aren't being required to do it. And so that to me is a place where you're going to start to see some, like when you talk about somebody losing a team, like that's where losing a team comes from, is when certain people have different rules than others and the rules aren't tied to winning, right? Urban Meyer talked about, treats the stars like stars and his crap like crap. And while that does create a split, it's also all in service of winning the game. And so what is it that Napier is going to put in place? Because the reality is if they just eliminated all the mistakes that they've made this year, like if they were a clean football team, they're probably 8-4. They're definitely 7-5, and all the close games that they played, I think a few of them wouldn't have been close. There were opportunities like that Arkansas game. If they eliminate the mistakes in that one, they win that one going away. The Missouri game, if they don't have the mistakes they have in that one, they probably beat the Tigers. This Florida State game, I mean, it was right there for them to take, and they got really fortunate that Jordan Travis wasn't playing and weren't able to take advantage of that either. And you go back and look at each of these games that they've lost, and I can point out 5 or 6 things that just gave the opposition points. And in the Kentucky game, giving them points doesn't really matter. In the Georgia game, giving them points doesn't really matter. But in the Missouri game, in the Arkansas game, in this Florida State game, all of a sudden those things start to really matter a lot. And this team isn't good enough to make those sorts of mistakes, and they keep making them. And eventually that comes back to Napier.
Yeah, that's what we've been saying. Not enough margin of error with these teams. Although I will say I was not upset with the Jadon Hill penalty because I'm just so desperate to see a defensive back on this team hit anything that I was like, you know what? We got to take the good with the bad. It's progress here. Like a little bit of contact from a defensive back. That's nice to see. The other play that was talked about a whole lot was the reverse. You had the lead, you had the momentum. You call a reverse that ends up in an intentional grounding penalty where Brown's forced to throw it away because he's got about 3 defensive linemen in his face after a slow developing reverse is called. Look, it wasn't well executed. It's one of those things though, with trick plays, if they work, the coach has guts, scared money don't make money. If they don't, you're crushing them for being conservative the whole game. It didn't work. It's kind of the way I assess that play. It just didn't work. It's not something that, hey, in that moment you had good field position. That's not the moment to do it. Fine. That's fair critique. But I like the instinct to try to make a play in a big moment and swing the momentum overall. You can disagree with the play call all you want. I like the instinct on it though.
I mean, I think it comes back to process, and Napier went into this game thinking he was going to be conservative. And then in a few key spots in the game, I already mentioned they had 1st and goal from the 2. They decided to drop back Max Brown. He gets sacked. They convert that one into a touchdown, but only because of the penalty on Florida State. And then they're ultra aggressive up 12-0 with 5 minutes left when they had an opportunity to at least pen Florida State deep, right? They could have pinned them back again. Rodemaker has done nothing in the first half. The Florida State offense has done nothing in the first half. So if you came in thinking we should be conservative, then I think you should be conservative. The other thing is it's easy to forget, but they ran that exact same play against South Carolina and got the exact same result, right? And Florida State's a better defense than South Carolina. But it was the exact same thing. Graham Mertz had somebody in his face, threw it away, got an intentional grounding, and Florida comes back and wins that game. So nobody says anything. To your point, nobody says anything about that disaster of a play, but they've called that play before and it didn't work. And so that's one where we really got to examine why that play is not working, why the quarterback is getting drilled before he even has an opportunity to catch the ball, and more importantly, why our defense isn't showing when they're running it in practice that thing's going to be a disaster because they've run it twice now and it's been an absolute catastrophe both times. Again, I think from a play calling perspective, something that complex and complicated, especially when you factor in, they only let Brown throw the ball 3 times in the 3rd quarter. So, they very clearly did not trust Max Brown to take this game and actually put it in his hands. And in fact, that was one of the points I made in the article is Florida State decided they were going to ride with Rodemaker, whether he made mistakes or not. And then he was able to make some plays. And Florida never gave Brown the opportunity to do that, except on the first couple of drives. They never gave Brown the opportunity to do that. And then when they finally did, it was when it was obvious they had to drop back and throw. And that's not his game. He's a mobile quarterback who runs read options and those sorts of things. They only ran 1 read option that I can really remember, at least 1 keeper. It was on a 3rd down and I think like 6, and he ran for 10 yards. And then they tried to run a QB draw on 3rd down later in that drive and it got completely sniffed out. But like in my mind, they did not utilize him in the way that they probably should have, given what they tried to do through the air with him, which was essentially nothing. And especially in that second half, they just sort of curled into a shell and said, we hope we can hold on to a 15-14 lead. And with this defense, that's a tough ask. And, So again, though, I go back to the entire game was a conservative game plan, except for a few little times. And I guess that's sort of what Napier was thinking, but I also wonder whether it's just the emotion of being a play caller and going, last one didn't work, this one will, and sort of, pushing through that is really an area where having an offensive coordinator would help, because it would divorce the decision of when to go for it and when to be aggressive from the guy who's actually calling the plays. Because we've all experienced that, right? I mean, playing a game of Madden, even like you make a play call, it doesn't work out, and you're sitting there and it's it's whatever, it's 3rd and 5 and you gain 3 yards and all of a sudden it's 4th and 2 and you got to decide what to do. And if you're the play caller, you make choices different than if you're just watching somebody play off to the side. So I think in many ways that's one of the benefits of having the play calling from the decision making, not in one entity necessarily.
The 4th and 2, run a little drag out of the slot. That tends to work pretty well in Madden.
Well, if it's Florida, they're going to run double slants. They always run double slants.
Yeah, I'd like to see him push the ball downfield next year a little bit, man. This is a lot of side to side action this year. I'd like to see it push down the field a little bit next year, but we shall see. We're going to see a different look on this Gators team next year, starting in the coaching staff. Sean Spencer of the defensive line and Corey Raymond on the defensive backfield. They are both out, fired by Billy Napier after the season here. I have to say I'm surprised on both of these in terms of my expectations from when they were hired. I think both of these coaches have a phenomenal resume. Spencer, well known from his time at Penn State. He's with the New York Giants before he came to Florida. And then Corey Raymond, of course, a legend out at LSU. But in terms of on the field results, you just didn't see the impact the last couple of years from any part of the defense. It's not just like it was just Spencer or Raymond. This defense has not clicked. It has not improved. It is pretty much a replay of what we've seen since 2020, essentially.
Yeah, so there's one stat where Florida's defense is better from 2022 to 2023 that I can find. That's success rate. So they were, I think, like 43% success rate allowed, which is really bad, and it went up to 38%. So that might suggest that things are going to trend in a better direction next year. But they were so susceptible to giving up explosive plays this year that it didn't look good at all. They were 124th overall in yards per play allowed. That's after being 105th last year. But they were 118th in yards per rush allowed, 126th in yards per pass. They could get zero pressure on the quarterback. They were 87th in sacks per game, 1.8 sacks per game. And when they didn't get a sack, the secondary couldn't stop anybody either. Again, I just sort of go through the list of people. So Cam Jackson's a transfer. You got Desmond Watson, Jalen Humphreys, Caleb Banks, Chris McClellan, Jamari Lyons, and Will Norman. Who in that group really took a step forward? You got Human Milan, then you got Boone, who was hurt. You got Tyreek Sapp, and then you got Kelby Collins, Cameron James, and Hill there as true freshmen. Who in there really like jumps out at you as an impact player? I know Human Milan was named to the All SEC team, but I mean, was he really a difference maker? I think I've got questions there. And then if you look at the cornerback position, you got Jadarius Perkins, who didn't last the whole season. You got Hill, you got Marshall Kimber, then you got Devin Moore, Ethan Pouncey, you got Jakeem Jackson, you got Denson, you got Dijon Johnson, and even at safety now you've got Jamarcus Weston, who transferred or who moved from receiver to safety. Didn't really see him out on the field much. You got Miguel Mitchell, you got Kamari Wilson. Looks like he's going to be transferring out. Dakota Mitchell, you got Aaron Gates, and you got Bryce Thornton and Jordan Castell, who play most of the year. Tell me where we saw production, especially considering that Corey Raymond was promoted this offseason to be in charge of both corners and safeties. Where do we see production? So I will almost never say that I don't care about recruiting, but in this case, I don't care about recruiting. The defense was so bad, given the talent level that Florida has. Like, if Florida was like the same level of defense of Kentucky or South Carolina or Tennessee, then I'd say, all right, maybe this is a rash decision. But this team was worse than Vanderbilt. And so the irrespective of what kind of talent you bring in, there's been zero development at all at these positions where we're seeing anybody flash like outstanding level skill on a consistent basis. And so, look, I think everybody's fair game at this point. And my guess is, you think about like a Think about like an NFL team. If they hire the coach first and then they hire a general manager, inevitably that general manager comes in and there's tension between the coach and the general manager, and eventually, like usually a season and a half later, that head coach is gone. Now, typically when those hires happen, it's indicative of a dysfunctional organization. But think about it, right? This entire staff was here. Patrick Toney leaves. Austin Armstrong comes in. Again, I think that's, you got a defensive coordinator and his job is absolutely on the line next year, right? And so you got to let him pick the groceries, and that old Bill Parcellsism, right? He's got to have people he's comfortable with, people that are going to help him achieve his goals. And considering that there's nowhere where I can look statistically and say, oh yeah, like better days are coming. It's just, they're going to have coaches who make a difference and make the production of the guys who are already there be much better than it was this year.
With Bateman staying on board with the linebackers, do you think that's because he absolutely knocked out of the park in recruiting?
I think so. I mean,
he has about an A+ in recruiting. So those guys, if he's attached with those guys, maybe don't want to mess that up. I would say in the defensive backfield, I think we've done okay on the trail. I don't know if we've done Corey Raymond level expectations where we're expecting to get some solid 5-star candidates in that defensive backfield. The one you do get with Kamari Wilson didn't really pan out in 2 seasons in Gainesville. However, it's only 2 seasons. We'll get to it in the transfer section, but man, the portal, it's got its ups and downs. So we'll just leave it at that for the moment without getting too much into it. But Spencer. Oh, sorry.
So what I'll say is that the linebacker position for Bateman, I thought Derek Wingo got better. I don't think he's great, but I think he got better. I think Shamar James was playing at an all SEC level until he hurt his knee. I think Scooby Williams was much better than he was last year. I think they got kind of what you expect from a transfer in Taraja Mitchell out there. Manny Nunnery, okay, not great. But once they were thrust into starting roles, obviously Florida struggled. But you figure you've got James, Williams, Nunnery, and then the guys coming in, right? So you got Miles Graham and Adarius Hayes coming in there at the linebacker position, and Childs as well coming at the linebacker position. You've got 3 studs coming in to supplement those guys who have already proven they can play at a reasonably high level. That linebacker room's pretty set. So to get rid of the coach at that point doesn't make a whole lot of sense. He's doing his job in terms of bringing in the talent, and these guys are showing flashes of productivity. That doesn't mean that they're great. I mean, obviously we saw Scooby struggle against LSU pretty mightily. At the same time, he was playing out of position, right? He's playing middle linebacker in lieu of Shamar James because James was out hurt. And so I think, look, I don't think anybody should be necessarily safe on the defense, but out of all of them, if you told me linebackers, corners, or defensive line, who's more responsible for Florida's struggles, I would say defensive line and secondary are definitely the 2 spots.
I think Spencer and Raymond both have enough of a track record as college coaches to say if you kept them around another couple of years, they would be just fine. But for 2 seasons in a row like that out of your defense, you saw Toney was a surprise move last year. He took the job out of Arizona, however they want to frame it, whatever it was. Okay, he's in the NFL now. So Toney moves on after last year. Heads are going to roll if you have this type of performance in Gainesville somewhere. There's probably some evaluations being done by Billy, but also by people that are cutting the paychecks and say we want to see some level of accountability for this. We might not have seen it in the press conferences all the time like we wanted to, but 2 big name coaches with high expectations get the axe early on for the Gators this offseason. Will, do you expect any more changes on the staff?
I think so. I mean, I think you got the 2 offensive line coaches. There's been talk about an offensive coordinator. Obviously, special teams were a disaster this year. They're going to have to free up somebody to do that. Whether they move somebody from a current role that they're in and give them those responsibilities globally, I don't necessarily know, but that's probably a change that you're looking at. One thing I will say, and this is an interesting aspect of it, is that Spencer and Raymond are not Napier guys. Guys like Jaluk and some of the other guys on the staff, those are Napier guys. Napier's going to a season where he needs to win. And, in many ways, like, let's say he doesn't hire an offensive coordinator. I think we'll all be critical of it just because we feel like he needs to do more CEO type stuff. At the same time, I would actually kind of respect it because he'd say, look, I did this in the first 2 years because I believe in it. I'm going to do it in year 3 because I believe in it. And if I go down doing what I believe, I'm okay with that, as opposed to changing just because there's a whole lot of noise in the system. Do I think that's going to happen? No, I think he's going to. I think he's going to bring in an offensive coordinator. One of the offensive line coaches is going to be gone, but or at least one of them is going to end up coaching special teams. But
Too bad
yeah,
Bobby
I expect
Petrino's
there to
off
be
the
more
market.
changes. Well,
Bo-
I
Bobby
mean, look,
Petrino back at Arkansas. Amazing hire by the Razorbacks. I absolutely love it.
I mean, the only one who's untouchable is Art Briles when it comes to hiring somebody who's been through some sort of scandal. Other than that, we always come back around to, at the end of the day, wins and losses matter. And I think that's honestly the thing. Like, if Florida's defense was average and Corey Raymond and Sean Spencer got let go, we'd be like, well, what? I mean, you got to fix the issues that you're seeing on the field, obviously, especially sort of the breakdowns from time to time. But it's not a terrible defense, and these guys have a track record. But it's been so bad and so atrocious for 2 straight years
Two
now
years, right?
that I just look at it and I go, look, we wouldn't give Todd Grantham this level of grace. We didn't. We wouldn't give any other coaches this level of grace. And the only reason Austin Armstrong isn't sitting there squarely in everybody's crosshairs is because it was bad in 2022 when he wasn't there, and now it's bad in 2023 when he is. And so maybe he's not a difference maker, but he's certainly not the only one responsible. So look, Florida's made a decision. They've let some guys go. They have deemed that those guys are part of the reason that the defense has struggled. And so if the defense continues to struggle, it'll be very clear that that lies on Billy Napier and Austin Armstrong, not Corey Raymond and Sean Spencer. And hey, hopefully those guys don't. I mean, I hope they go on and succeed, but I hope they don't go on and succeed next year and sort of prove the point that it was Napier and Armstrong. But that's going to be the experiment, right? Was it the staff? Was it the staff and its coherence or cohesion, or was it just you got a defensive coordinator who really isn't that good, and we're going to eventually find that out?
A lot of what you pointed out in our magazine with Armstrong that came to fruition with his defense, minus the actual getting pressure on the quarterback. Was it just not a great fit with some of the guys in his system this year?
I mean, so I think that's part of it, but I think part of it is that we did last week. You had me do the breakdowns of the film, the Willie's whiteboard segment.
Whiteboard
You were calling
Willie.
it Whiteboard Willie. You were calling it, and one of the things I pointed out is that the blitzes that he was sending were sort of through traffic. That there were a couple of times where linebackers fell on each other, which was a problem when they were blitzing, but that the blitzes just could not get home. And he was putting in secondary and compromising situations by doing that. And if there was any tension between him and Raymond, it was probably that. It was that you're bringing all these exotic blitzes and you never get home. And so why are we doing this? I think the biggest criticism you could make of him is that Princely Human spent way too much time in coverage as opposed to just putting his hand in the ground and going. There was a lot of trying those, getting simulated pressures to try to overload and those sorts of things. But here's the problem is, you think about the spread in 2005 when Urban Meyer bought it to Florida. It was new. People weren't sure whether it would work. Not everyone was running it, which meant you had to prepare for Florida every time, right? Florida is essentially just running Georgia's defense with worse personnel right now. And so if you're going to do that, if you're going to run that, it's nothing that's special. It's nothing that's innovative. They're not doing anything that no one else is doing. I mean, all the simulated pressures and all that sort of stuff. In fact, I think that was one of the things most people sort of pointed out when Armstrong started when his first sort of introductory press conference. He was talking about being multiple, what they're going to do out of different fronts, 3-4-4-3, all sorts of different things. And I can't remember exactly what he said in the clip, but it was essentially, this is what you would hear from Kirby Smart at Georgia. And honestly, that's what you hear from Nick Saban is these guys sort of came with defenses that were designed to stop what was going on at the time. I think they've made some adjustments over time, and certainly Armstrong has been part of those adjustments as well, or at least has observed those adjustments. But you're not doing anything innovative, which means you need better players. You need superior players to get to where you need to go. Now, look, should Human be getting to the quarterback more often? Yeah, I think so. Should a guy like Desmond Watson be holding up more in the center? Absolutely, I think he should. Chris McClellan showed promise as a freshman. I didn't really see him flash this year as much as I saw him flash last year. And then you had Banks and Jackson coming in as transfers who were there, but were they really difference makers? Not really. Is that scheme? Is that player? I tend to think it's more scheme. I think he gets a little bit more exotic than most others do. Sometimes, like at Southern Mississippi, that's necessary. And when you're playing a team like Louisiana or you're playing a team like Appalachian State, you even with a slight athletic disadvantage, if you overload one side or the other, you still may be able to slip by. In the SEC, you got 5-star tackles for all the big boys that you're playing, and those guys can move. And so just because you overload one side or because you run stunts, I mean, there was a play, I think it was either against Missouri or against Arkansas, where they ran a stunt with Desmond Watson at tackle. And I'm like, yeah, that's stupid. Like I mean, I get it. Sometimes you want to stunt your defensive tackle, but Desmond Watson isn't the guy you want to
Make
stunt.
Desmond Watson take fewer steps. We want to
Well,
minimize the step count for the
again,
big man.
your job as a coach is to put your players in position to succeed, and I think in many cases you can make um, you can make a case that over the last 2 years under Patrick Toney and Austin Armstrong that they have not necessarily done a great job of doing that. I think we thought after 2 or 3 games this year that things were improving. I thought he did a really nice job of adjusting against Tennessee, playing much more zone than he normally does. But at least once or twice a game, I just kind of chuckled to myself and go, he can't help himself. Like there will be a play where they've got somebody pinned back and he'll go cover zero. And you're just like, why? Like, what was the point? I'll actually have to go back. I haven't thought about it. I'll have to go back and look at the Florida State game and see whether some of those big plays they got in the passing game were ones where he essentially set up man to man and was really coming after Rodemaker, or whether it was just the Rodemaker made a play. But yeah, look, I haven't been an Austin Armstrong fan from the start. This year certainly has not has not improved that view anymore. I hope that he improves. Now, he did improve significantly at Southern Miss from year 1 to year 2. They got a lot more pressure year 2 than they did year 1. So hopefully that'll be the hope for Florida, is that with more talent coming in this 2024 class, transfers that they're going to bring in as well, and then you also factor in that these guys have been in the system for a full year, and hopefully that there's full cohesion with the coaching staff, that all that stuff will amount to, they'll probably still give up a bunch of explosive plays. But if they're actually creating explosive plays, then maybe you can take that trade off and the defense takes a jump.
We shall see. I know people talk about Napier being on the hot seat going into next year. I still think that's a little premature. I think you need a little more time than 3 years. I'm tired of 3-year cycles. Well, we have all offseason to get into that. But I'll tell you who is definitively on the hot seat next year is Austin Armstrong. There's got to be significant improvement on that defense based on what we saw in 2023. All right, let's move on here. Transfer portal. Now, it is Wednesday night at around 10:15 p.m. right now while we're recording this. So this is the information is accurate as of now. It'll probably be 6 people deeper next time you see this in the next 24 to 48 hours. But the official window for the transfer portal is December 4th through January 2nd, 2024. Early signing day, December 20th through 22nd, and national signing day is February 7th. So some key dates during the offseason. The portal activity is getting kicked off here. Guys announcing their intentions to jump in. Tight end Jason Odom, safety Kamari Wilson, defensive lineman Will Norman, QB Max Brown, and wide receiver Caleb Douglas. Well, I would say Norman and Douglas are a bit surprising. The rest, yeah, I could see. I could see they're a little stacked at those positions in terms of depth and their how they factor into the field. So Wilson just didn't see much playing time on a pretty weak defense. You would think he'd be able to break into that. Norman, just a freshman, man, stick around more than a year. And Jason Odom has some experience, but we saw some of those younger tight ends. I'll tell you what, one Gator that I thought played fantastic down the stretch, that second half of the year in particular, Hayden Hansen had quite a run. As much as I like Boardingham, is Hansen, that's tight end 1, right, on this team.
Well, I mean, they play with 2, so it doesn't really matter who's tight end 1. Certainly made some nice plays out there, but Boardingham had some flashes too. I think it's a little bit of recency bias to call him tight end 1. I think one of them's going to have to earn it. So you sent me something earlier today, actually, from Nick Delatorre. He had talked about from On3. He had talked about that Florida needed the attrition. And when you start looking at their roster, you realize why right away. So they only have 6 guys who don't have any eligibility left. So Ricky Pearsall, Dante Sanders, Keon Zipper, you got Lindell Hudson, you got Taraja Mitchell, and you got Jadarius Perkins. Now, Zipper could probably apply for an extra year given the injury that he had this year, but he did walk during senior day. So, they introduced everybody for senior day, and Zipper was one of the guys who walked out there. The interesting thing to me, and I was sitting there like going, wait a minute, these guys still have eligibility, is Jonathan Odom also walked for senior day. Mazuka, the offensive guard, he walked. Kingsley Egwikin, who's just a redshirt junior, he walked. Jalen Humphreys, Jadon Hill, Jalen Kimber, and Jamarcus Weston all walked out for senior day, got their flowers, the picture, or gave their flowers to their mothers, had the pictures, Billy Napier, all that sort of stuff. So that gives you an idea of some people who might not be long for Gainesville, given that those guys walk. Now, look, they could all make the decision to come back to Florida. And certainly for some of those guys, maybe we hope that they do, but that gives you an idea of there's only a few seniors in the class. They're going to have to push out the guys who were non-productive, because I had them, there's some walk-ons, they give scholarships, but from a commitment standpoint, I had them at 83 scholarships. You lose 3, you're down to 77, which means you've only got 8 scholarships to give, and you got 19 guys in your recruiting class right now, which means you're going to have to lose another 20 guys probably from the roster in order to make room for the freshmen you're bringing in. So a guy like Will Norman, look, good recruit, not great recruit. Obviously a blue chip, but not a can't miss guy. You look at him and go, all right, maybe the work ethic, maybe the productivity, maybe, just the fit within the scheme wasn't there, and they sort of asked him to leave. Same thing with Kamari Wilson. Didn't play very much this year. Didn't really get out on the field.
IMG
What do you do
guys,
with
Will? Something we've talked a lot about, getting in IMG. 2
that?
IMG guys.
Well, I mean, again, I think people are going to try to read a lot into who leaves in the transfer report. I think we got to see where the dust settles, right? Who comes in? So Grayson McCall for Charlotte, right?
Coastal
Not Charlotte,
Carolina.
Coastal Carolina, just entered the transfer portal as well. McCall was one of those names last year where you were like, ooh, are we going to be able to get him? And sort of thought maybe they might bring him and Mertz in, and then have that be a battle. So look, if you ended up with Grayson McCall in the quarterback room, and you've got a guy like Cam Carroll coming back at running back from an injury, and you hold on to the other guys, then all of a sudden you've got a better team than you thought you might have anyway. I mean, look, who on the team, if they lost in the transfer portal, would you be like heartbroken to see? I mean, I've got 3. I got Trevor Etienne, I've got Trey Wilson, and I've got Shamar James.
Yeah.
Those are the 3 that I look at and go, if you lose one of those 3 guys, now you got to start talking about it. Now, there's been rumors about ETN, and we'll see where that ends up. But those are the 3 guys. Those are the difference makers. Those are the guys who flashed and have been consistently productive. Like ETN has put up, 800 yards, both his freshman and sophomore year. Trey Wilson caught like 60 balls this year. And then you got Shamar James, who obviously we saw what happened when he went out in terms of Florida's defense going downhill, but also thought he played very, very well, at least for the first 3 or 4 games. I thought he played pretty well. I mean, other than that, is there anybody that you look at and say, based on what we've seen at Florida, if they left, you'd be heartbroken? Like, I think guys like Jakeem Jackson, I think guys like Deshaun Johnson, I think guys like Sharif Denson, I think guys like Thornton and Castell, like, we hope they stay because we've invested in them from a freshman year perspective. Now let's get the spoils from that. But there's nobody other than those 3 that I look at and go, absolutely, you have to hold on to that guy. He's a guy who makes your team better. Let's make sure he stays here.
Yeah, I would like to see college football do something about the annual free agency for every single player on the roster. There needs to be some ability with NIL to lock people up a little bit for at least a couple of years. Like, I like the idea that kids are allowed to transfer now, that players are free to explore that opportunity or take advantage of what they can get in the market. I think Matt Rule was talking about quarterbacks today. He says the quarterback on the transfer market goes for anywhere from $1 to $2 million. Good quarterback on the transfer market. Like, you have a chance to go do that. Go do it. Sam Hartman at Notre Dame last week, I believe they played Wake Forest on senior day up at Notre Dame. Well, Sam Hartman started for 4 years at Wake Forest. Dave Clawson was making fun of the video Notre Dame's putting out saying, "Thank you, Sam. We love you." He's like, they don't love you. You went there, took a deal. We love you. You played for us for 4 years. Like, that's something that is a weird thing in college football that you just got to get used to for now. But I do think that there's going to be some ability to ensure that you're not having to play defense on this roster retention every single cycle with every single player. Well, it's just out of control right now.
Well, so look, I hear what you're saying. At the same time, like if I hire in a chemist to my organization, my goal is to make that chemist more valuable in the marketplace. Now, that also means that I need to increase that chemist's salary over time in order to make sure that they stay where they are. And giving them direction and giving them coaching to help that person become better at what they do and more valuable to my company in particular is a critical component of getting the most out of them. So a guy like Sam Hartman spends 4 years at Wake Forest, and Clausen looks at it and go, well, we invested in him and we didn't get the full return on the back end. But you didn't really invest in him. You invested in making him a better player, but you clearly didn't invest in him enough to keep him from going to Notre Dame. Like Notre Dame decided that it was worth going out there and giving him a better deal, whether that's money, whether that's I've always wanted to play for the Irish, whether that's I'm going to be on national TV all the time, whether it's that I'm going to grow that beard and everybody's going to swoon over me. I don't know what the package was that they put together. But look, Wake Forest, step up. You got a quarterback that you built into. You made him more valuable. You certainly did. But he worked hard for that too. And so then you sit there and go, no, just stay here and be loyal and we're going to be chintzy. Like,
so that's
a
Wake Forest problem. That should not be a Florida problem, though. And like, I get that Florida, you don't have the program's not where you want it to be right now. But you didn't. I think a lot of these guys have been sold on being the guys to bring it back. And I think with this class coming in, especially with Lagway coming in, like there is that vision for the future right now. Now, look, we can get into whether or not I'm not here to sell anybody on anything. Some of the fan base is pretty divided on Billy right now, on the future in general right now. I'm at a point. I'm a Jacksonville Jaguars fan. I bring that up once in a while on the show, don't I? I'm a Jacksonville Jaguars fan. One of the things that killed me with the Jags was this: you live in the same cycle for years. It was hire the coach, listen to them complain about the previous coach for 2 to 3 years while they march their way to a slow death in year 3 or year 4, redo it again. And it's like and then the coach can, oh, well, we need time to get our system in. We need to get our guys. And you do this cycle over and over again. Whereas you look at a fan base like in Pittsburgh, they might be tired as hell of Mike Tomlin. He's been excellent over the course of his career. I think he's got a Hall of Fame resume as a head coach in the NFL. Well, it does get stale. I could see it getting stale over time. It's unusual. Pittsburgh's an unusual place because they just don't fire coaches there. But look at the result. The guy has the Steelers in the hunt constantly. They might not be elite right now, but I think there's reasons outside of Mike Tomlin why they're not elite. But they just have that consistency in Pittsburgh that, look, unless you hit the home run on the Urban Meyer coming in, Steve Spurrier was such a unique story that, that's your kid, that's your guy that won the Heisman. That story is probably never happening again. All right. That was such a once in a lifetime deal with Steve Spurrier. Urban Meyer, right place, right time. It worked out. That story has not worked since. So at what point do you dig in and invest a little bit? You might not be happy with all the play calling. You might not be happy with the direction, but I think like you look at these guys, Will, that come in for a year and dip out. It's the same type of cycle as the coaching. Because, okay, so now, Will Norman, you're going to go where next year? Are you going to go to Georgia? Are you going to go to Texas A&M? Are you going to go to a better school than Florida? Kamari Wilson, where are you starting? Are you starting next year somewhere? I don't know. We'll see. But these guys tend to hop in the portal, and you don't necessarily hear of most of them again.
Well, I think you're missing something here, which is that you're assuming these guys are hopping in the portal because they want to leave Florida, not because Florida wants them to leave. And Florida needs guys to leave in order to bring in the guys that they've recruited. And if they think they need help at certain positions in the transfer portal, that means more guys are going to have to leave. So again, I go back to, if you gave me Georgia's roster and said, who are the guys you don't want to leave? I'd give you like a list of 12 or 13 guys that I'd be like, based on the production at Georgia, these are the guys you want to protect, right? Like you think of like an expansion draft, where if we had an expansion college football team, who would you want to put on the protected list? Georgia would struggle to figure out which guys they're putting on. They'd have to make some decisions like, do I want to protect this junior or do I want to protect the freshman who's got the potential because I've seen what he can do in practice and all that sort of stuff. I look at the Florida team, I see 3 dudes. And that fundamentally is a problem, which means if you've got guys who aren't bought in, if you guys who aren't teachable, if you got guys who have injuries, if you've got guys who are injured all the time and just can't play, they haven't been able to stay on the field, if you've got guys who don't put in the work when it comes to studying film, if you've got whatever the, if you've got guys who can't make weight, like, and can't do what the strength and conditioning coach is asking them to do, whatever that is, if you've got those guys, Billy Napier specifically went young. But one of the things that happened when he went young is it meant there was no turnover at the senior level. He's only got 6 of them. Got 6 guys coming off scholarship at the senior point. So if everybody comes back, he can't bring in anybody. So this is like the idea that the transfer portal is this player thing where the players are taking advantage of an ability to move around. I will agree that there are some players, like the Hartman example you gave, quite honestly, like Ricky Pearsall coming from Arizona State to Florida, who take advantage of the fact that there's an open starting position at Florida and they can leave a Power 5 place where they're at and go someplace else. I'll stipulate to that. But what I'll say is it seems like a little bit like, if nothing else, it's a little bit unfair to the players because they're being asked to leave instead of being developed. And, because Florida had so much in that junior and senior class that's left through the transfer portal before, it means there's only one place to cut. And so you're going to see guys who came in the last year's class who decided to go someplace else. And I don't know whether it's the player's decision to do that or whether the player has essentially been told you're going to be buried 3rd on the depth chart. You should probably seek an opportunity someplace else. And the transfer portal gives them an opportunity to do that.
And that is a good point. I'm just looking at the names that are on here outside of Odom, and I'm thinking these guys, I would assume with these names here that they're probably looking for opportunities elsewhere. But because I don't see us walking up to Caleb Douglas. Do we just have such a wealth of wide receivers that we're telling Caleb Douglas he's not going to see the field next year? He had a couple nice plays here and there when he was on the field. Didn't play much this season. Got injured. Was it the Kentucky game he get hurt in?
Yeah, it was the deep pass against Kentucky.
Yeah, got injured pretty early in the season, but the little bit we saw of him, we saw flashes of him in 22 as well. That's not a guy that I would think you'd get told. Max Brown, hey, are you ever probably going to be the starter at Florida? Probably not, but you play baseball. You could play backup quarterback. You could be a solid backup quarterback with a little bit of mobility. I don't know if that guy's being told to hop in the portal. So, yeah, there's some – I'm jumping to some conclusions there, but – and I do think Wilson and Norman were just they were high enough profile recruits where they probably looked at it and go, I didn't get playing time here. I could definitely see that. But Wilson in particular was such a high profile recruit. For him not to see the field hardly at all in this defense the last 2 seasons, there had to be some stuff where something wasn't clicking behind the scenes on that. So
this is why I say going
elsewhere for that opportunity.
Well, this is why I said we got to wait and see where it all lands when we get done with the fall, or when we get done with this fall transfer portal cycle. Because really nothing of significance happened in the spring, very much. But let's say that Florida brought in Grayson McCall from Coastal Carolina. Would you take that trade, Grayson McCall for Max Brown?
I don't think he's coming here to be a.
Well, I don't think so either. But this is what I'm saying, right? Is that you're making a judgment on Max Brown deciding to go into the transfer portal. And look, I love Max Brown. I want to see him get an opportunity. I think he's going to go someplace to like a lower level, not an F.
Yeah,
I think a G5 school, and I think he's going to play pretty well.
Yeah,
but if you have an opportunity to bring in somebody better, especially considering that we're all going to judge Billy Napier on winning games next year. And he says, I need a backup to Mertz, or I need somebody better than Mertz to get this thing over the hump. Well, and he brings somebody like that in. Well, now Max Brown leaving makes sense. Now, if Max Brown just leaves and we've got Mertz and we've got DJ Lagway and that's it, well, then maybe it's like, all right, we should have kept Brown because we needed that sort of depth.
Right.
What could we have done to do that? So Brown leaves. We'll see where it shakes out. I'm not ready to criticize Brown. I'm not ready to criticize Napier. right now today. It's going to be, where does it end up when all the musical chairs are finished? And quite honestly, there's enough tampering going on that Florida should have known that Max Brown was going to enter the transfer portal before he did. And Florida should know who's available at positions of need before anybody enters the transfer portal. This idea that you enter your name into the transfer portal and that's when you make contact with these teams is just laughable. The teams in college football who are actually working the transfer portal significantly are tampering like crazy, and hopefully Florida's one of them.
Good example today. I saw someone tweeted this out. I think it was Josh Pate had the tweet, but Riley Leonard, the quarterback from Duke, enters his name in the transfer portal, and Pate tweeted 3 p.m. Riley Leonard enters name in the transfer portal. 3:01 p.m. The entire internet, the entire college football media knows it's Notre Dame, and they go, Bud Elliott's got his Instagram page. He's followed all these Notre Dame guys. So yeah, to your point, these deals are likely getting done. There's all kinds of tampering, but I think it's the Wild West still in terms of the rules with the transfer stuff. It's a little frustrating, though, from a college football perspective, because you're used to seeing like a guy like a Kamari Wilson. People are going to look at him, oh, he didn't work out. The guy's been on campus for 2 years in college football in the past. If that guy starts by the time he's a sophomore or junior, you get 2 to 3 years out of him as a starter. That's fantastic. But it's immediate expectations nowadays, and if you don't get them, you're in the portal. You see it with freshmen all over the country. It's not a Florida thing; it's a college football thing right now.
Well, and if you're Kamari Wilson, you think you're a excellent defensive player. You look at what happened on the Florida defense this year and wonder why you're not in the game. Now, maybe there are legitimate reasons for him not to be in the game, and maybe that's something that that Napier and Armstrong and Tony are going to need to be criticized for in the future if he goes someplace else and shows out. Certainly the transfer portal, like you mentioned, you had a great article or great piece in the magazine, the preseason magazine we put out, talking about all the transfers Florida's brought in, and it's been a really mixed bag and really kind of a, I would say a net negative.
Not so mixed. Not so mixed.
Well, yeah. It's been bad, right? They have not gotten a lot of production out of the transfer portal. So, if you ask me who I want out of the transfer portal, I want people who are Power 5 proven, like guys who are starters at the Power 5 level, because Florida needs starters. Florida doesn't need a backup linebacker behind Scooby Williams. They need a guy who can come in and play starting linebacker. Florida doesn't need a backup defensive end behind Justice Boone. They need a defensive end who can come in and start. They don't need a backup corner. They need a guy who can come in and make Jason Marshall compete for his job. So to me, it's not even really a positional thing when it comes to who you're bringing in. It's, do these guys have experience and a track record? So, you look, Riley Leonard's going to go to Notre Dame. Okay, that's great. Notre Dame knows exactly what they're getting when Riley Leonard goes in there. They're not guessing based on profiles from high school or anything like that. Same thing when USC got Caleb Williams to come from Oklahoma. He played at Oklahoma. They knew what they got. Plus, the head coach there, Lincoln Riley, knew him because he was at Oklahoma and then strafed him. But, to me, those are the ones that make a lot of sense. If you're bringing in a guy who doesn't have a track record, then it requires a lot of coaching and you're not necessarily always sure of what you're getting. You can make the argument at quarterback. Maybe that doesn't matter so much. Jaden Daniels' profile wasn't great at Arizona State, but that was a guy who was starting at a Power 5 level. Same thing with Graham Mertz. It's a guy who started at a Power 5 school. I think I kind of underestimated that coming into the year, to be honest with you. I think the track record of Mertz made me underestimate that. I still don't think he played great. I think he hit his ceiling, but I think that ceiling was limited. But still, he played better than I expected him to. And so, I'll eat a little bit of crow on there and say, hey, maybe targeting guys who have been starters elsewhere is a critical part. Now, look, Mizuko was a starter at Baylor, and he wasn't necessarily lights out there at right guard, but he did play a bunch. He was a starter, right, for Florida, beat out the other guys who were in there for that position. So to me, that's the thing, is let's go get starters. And I don't care what position they're at. And honestly, no position at Florida should be safe after a 5-7 season. You talked about the defensive coaches and somebody being to blame there, but some of that blame has to land on the players. And you go 5-7 at the University of Florida, that's just unacceptable. And you have a defense as bad as this one is, it's unacceptable. So bring in guys who can be starters, who have already been starters, And if you got to guarantee him a starting spot and that means you demote somebody else, hey, that's just the way it is, because you don't get to go 5-7 and then crow about how you've already locked down your job. Like, everybody should be fighting for their job at this point.
Yeah, I don't think the transfer portal should be about numbers. I think it should be about a few high-end acquisitions. You see, that's pretty much the way Georgia, Bama, Ohio State, that's pretty much the way those guys run it. Of course, they got the rosters to back that up. But you go in, you strategically say, you know what, we're a little light at receiver. Let's go get ourselves a experienced starter at receiver that can play right away. You know, Georgia goes in, they go get Dominic Lovick, Thomas, a couple of those guys. I know they haven't necessarily been the premier receivers at Georgia this year, but they're there for as solid contributors at times. So it's like,
I don't even know that you use the portal to close holes. I don't think Florida's good enough to figure out let's close holes. Florida just needs good players. So if there's a guy who's
Cameron Jackson, for example, this year, I know the defensive line wasn't great at times, but he flashed at times. He announced he's coming back, by the way. But like that was a solid pickup through the portal this year.
Sure. And if you have the opportunity to bring in a guy who's going to compete with Cam Jackson at defensive tackle, and he's been a starter at a Power 5 school, I think you do it. Like, I don't think anybody's job should be safe after you've gone 5-7, especially on the defensive side of the ball, considering how bad that's been. And so, if you're Georgia, you go, we're light at receiver. Let's bring in a guy who can help us there. But there's a reason for that, right? Is you've got Carson Beck and you've got Vandergriff and you've got, 5-star guys lined up all over the place. And the expectation is those guys are going to be ready and able to step in if anybody gets hurt, or if anybody has discipline problems, or if anybody decides to transfer out. The issue with Florida is that they clearly don't have that right now, which means just find guys who can play football. Get those guys out there and find a way to get them on the field. And if you get if Ewan Meelan decides to stay and somebody else who plays that defensive end position is available and is an awesome player, go get them. And having two guys who can rush the passer, really, like, that's a luxury that Florida kind of could use, as opposed to sitting there going, well, we already have somebody at this position. We wouldn't want to make them mad. Let's make sure we bring, let's not bring them in. Screw that, man. You got to bring in good football players. I don't care where they are, just good Power 5 proven football players. Bring those guys in, let them compete.
Right. Yeah, I'm looking. So I just wanted to put numbers to it there. Thomas and Lovett for Georgia, 72 combined receptions on the season. So neither one of them's lights out, but pretty solid contribution on the receiving side for the Georgia Bulldogs through the transfer portal there. So whereas you go through our transfer class last year, I think the attempt was there. You saw, look at the offensive line. We'll end on this question, Will. What positions do you want to see addressed in the portal this year? You look at the offensive line last year. I thought they did a great job at least attempting it. I think George was a guy you looked at and you went, okay, didn't work out at Bama. He's got potential there. Goodwin came in from Kentucky, left the team for the season for personal reasons. And then Mazuka, who had the injury, missed most of the offseason, and that had to have played some level into his play this year. I had to have some level of impact on his play this year because he came back during fall camp, and I know they're not going to talk about that, but just using common sense, it takes a little time to recover from things. So he might not have been at full strength this year. So the offensive line didn't really get addressed that well because George ends up coming in. Hey, George is a guy that definitely, I think we can all agree, after, if you get thrown in, I know Jared Verse is probably going to be a top 10 pick in the draft in April, but if you get thrown into your own quarterback, I think tackle might not be the position for you. Maybe guard, maybe we talk about something else, but you don't have the footwork for tackle if you're getting thrown into your quarterback. So I would call that a bust at the offensive line position in the portal last year. I think they looked for depth. I think they were looking for a lot of pieces last year. Some okay performances in the portal. Overall, though, you need a few high impact starters this year in the portal, and that should be the priority. I'd rather get 3 to 5 guys in the portal class, and they're all high quality guys that we're going to get something out of in 2024 versus stacking a nice class of solid prospects, 10 to 12 guys deep.
Yeah, well, I mean, especially because I wanted to bring in 27 signees in this particular recruiting class,
Yeah.
including Jordan Seaton. Hopefully, he comes in 5-star offensive tackle that maybe you're playing right away, right? And I already said it. It's not about positions at this point. It's about competition. It's about bringing in guys who have won games at the Power 5 level, who have played solid, if not great, at a Power 5 level. And if that means you got to throw a few bucks around, that means you got to throw a few bucks around. But, you know, and to sit there and go, well, we need help at guard, or we need help at center, or we need help at defensive end. You need help everywhere. You went 5-7. You were 60th overall I think it's 60th overall in yards per play, 61st overall in points per game, 57th in yards per play on offense. So we're not talking about this offense that was just like this juggernaut this year. It was average, maybe in the top third of all of there's 133 teams in FBS, so 57th is kind of in that top third, but they weren't awesome. They're 124th in defense. So they were in the bottom the bottom 5% on the defense side of the ball. They need players. And they need guys who are proven, and they need guys who can come out and start right away. And, so bringing a guy like Taraja Mitchell, who was a starter at Ohio State, but then sat out a year, looked like a good opportunity to do that sort of thing. Obviously, Mitchell doesn't play till the end of the year. Mazuka from Baylor, same thing. But I don't think you want to look back and George was a backup at Alabama, but did have some time there. I don't think you want to necessarily look at that and go, well, we want to avoid that profile because those, and go potential because the guys who are out there on the field didn't perform. I think it really comes down to, that you're going to have to target guys that you think fit within your system, but also guys who have significant skill, and to hell with what position they're at. Just bring in good players.
Yeah, I mean, you look at a key transfer this year, Keon Coleman out at Florida State, that wide receiver. They probably paid some good money to get him down to Tallahassee. So a couple impact guys like that. And maybe this Gators roster takes a little bit of a different shape. The good news with where we're at, Will, and I know there's not a lot of good news sitting at 5-7. I think we nailed it in the preseason magazine where we had we had a half Bulldog, half Terminator face there, where it's kind of some dark days right now. This is really, we're kind of going back to, for old time Gator fans, this is going back into like the early 80s when Herschel Walker's running all over us year after year. Georgia's in contention for national titles. Florida's figuring itself out. It's tough times. I think that this team can turn it around quickly, in particular this school, Florida, whether it's Napier, whether it's someone else, whether it's anybody. A school like Florida can flip it around in a year or two. I think you look at Florida State's story this year, and I don't like to give a lot of praise to Florida State, but who had this 2 years ago with Mike Norvell? Who had the undefeated regular season? And I know there's a lot of talk on whether or not they'll make the playoff, which I think if they win on Saturday at Louisville, you have to put them in the playoff and undefeated. I don't even think that's remotely a question. That'd be very stupid if they got left out as an undefeated team. But you look at the job he did where he could flip that around to an undefeated season that quick. Florida State doesn't play the type of schedule that we play year in and year out, but that's still a pretty amazing accomplishment, Will. And it just shows that there are those types of schools that you can flip it around pretty quick. It's not great right now in Florida, but you can flip it quick.
So what's the difference between Norvell 2 years ago and Norvell a year ago?
2 years ago and a year ago.
Yep.
A few wins under his belt.
See, and I look at it and I go, the difference is Jordan Travis. Jordan Travis
developed by Norvell.
Well, yeah, but Jordan Travis went from a average quarterback to a great quarterback from 2021 to 2022 and was playing at about the same level in 2023, maybe a little bit less. And so not recruited by Norvell, but developed by Norvell. And that's going to be the question for Florida State is, can they find the next Jordan Travis? Now, it's really hard to find that guy. And especially when you haven't recruited at a really high level, it's hard to find that guy. And I suspect that Florida State's going to come back to the pack quite a bit, even in the ACC with Jordan Travis gone. We saw what happened when Rodemaker was in the other day. If Rodemaker's a starter next year, look, he'll develop. He'll be okay. He'll be better than he was in that game against Florida. But the reality is that quarterback makes a huge difference in most cases when teams don't have elite talent and when they're playing teams with similar talent. So Florida State has had an advantage at quarterback in just about every game they've played this year, except the LSU game. And so, look, they won that game, and I think that says something about where the program is, especially on defense. At the same time, we've seen what LSU's defense can do, and it's pretty abysmal. And so, obviously that, at this point, not really a surprise that Florida State was able to go up and down the field on them.
They do have a high level 4-star. He might even be a 5-star kid now. Luke Kromenhoek, who's right up there with Lagway and all the ratings coming in the class of 2024.
So if we look at the ACC historically, when Florida State was really dominating, you had Jameis Winston at quarterback.
Yeah,
they switched to DeAndre Francois. Take a step back, Jimbo Fisher gets pushed out. Now you've got Jordan Travis. They're winning consistently, or they're winning, right? I don't want to say consistently. They're winning. And we'll see what happens when Jordan Travis leaves. Do they have enough talent with a quarterback who just has average play? We saw this at Clemson, where Dabo Swinney hit on Taj Boyd, Deshaun Watson, and Trevor Lawrence pretty much one right after another. Had the 1 year with Kelly Bryant where they had a lights-out defense and then had to switch from him to Lawrence just because they didn't think they were going to be able to win a championship without elite quarterback play, and they've proven right, obviously, given the way Lawrence played in the national championship game against Alabama. But Clemson now missed on DJ Uiagalelei, missed on Cade Klubnik, it looks like, and all of a sudden Clemson is a normal team. Now, that doesn't mean Clemson's like 2-10, and I don't think Norvell's going to go back to that, but I think he's very quarterback dependent, and that'll be the question: is can he continue to build at the quarterback position, or is it going to fall off? So when you ask me, is it a fast build or can Florida turn around quickly? It's what I've said now for probably 2 years. It's all about DJ Lagway. DJ Lagway can turn this program around like that if he comes in and he's an elite signal caller right from the start. And DJ Lagway can completely sink the Billy Napier era if he comes in and he plays like Jordan Travis did, 3 years ago. And that's unfortunate for him because it means that there's going to be an awful lot of pressure on him. Everybody's going to want to see him next year. And, if the defense doesn't improve by leaps and bounds, Graham Mertz isn't going to be enough to get the wins. And eventually they're going to have to bring Lagway in and throw him in. And maybe he's ready, maybe he's not. I don't know. But to me, that's the thing, is if you're looking at anything that's going to turn around, if Florida scores 50 points a game this year, they win 8 or 9 games. Right. I mean, if they can be a truly elite offense and chuck the ball all over the place and have a quarterback back there who's making unbelievable decisions, and Lagway can run too. So all of a sudden you can run a lot of the stuff that Napier ran with Anthony Richardson, but hopefully with a guy who's more consistent through the air. This could be a really dangerous offense. Again, though, that has to happen, right? Like, he has to hit on that guy. If Napier hits on DJ Lagway, he's going to be here for a really long time, because irrespective of what's around Lagway, the games are going to be fun to watch. Florida's going to score a bunch of points, and everybody's going to sit there. Exactly what we said in 2020 with Mullen, where it was an 8-4 season. But man, that was a lot of fun watching the ball go up and down the field on the Florida offensive side of the ball. Now, it would have been much better if the defense obviously could have held its weight. But even a bad defense with a Lagway who's chucking the ball all over the place, I think will get Napier quite a bit of time. So to me, that's the turnaround. The turnaround is the quarterback position. If you're not going to have elite units elsewhere, like, look, Georgia and Alabama and Ohio State to some extent can get away with the Jake Cokers of the world and compete for national championship. We just saw Michigan and Ohio State. The difference in that game is quarterback, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
McCarthy played great.
McCarthy plays great, and the Ohio State quarterback has sort of struggled all year long for an Ohio State quarterback, and the talent level is close enough that Ohio State has now 3 straight to Michigan. Georgia and Alabama, same thing. Like, Stetson Bennett played really well, but the fact that they went with Bennett to start with was that sort of acknowledgement that we've got these elite guys out on the field. We just need someone who's not going to screw it up. Let's bring in the guy with experience. And then it turned out that Bennett was more than just that game manager that you sort of saw from the start those last couple of years. And like I said, Alabama, I mean, geez, they've had guys there who have absolutely been game managers. And then they got in the run where they had Jalen Hurts and they had Tua, and then they had Mac Jones and Bryce Young, and now Milroe comes in, and everybody's like, how could he? But even with that, they're 11-1 in the SEC championship game with Milroe. And actually, when you look at his stats for the overall year, Milroe's pretty good. Had some rough sledding to start with, but has turned into a pretty good player. But again, still,
I think most Tide fans only care about a 31-yard completion right now.
That's absolutely true. But my point is that you don't need an elite quarterback if you're one of those three programs. Every other program has to be like Clemson. They have to find their Taj Boyd. They have to find their Deshaun Watson. They have to find their Trevor Lawrence. Now, by the time Clemson found Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, they had already built up with Taj Boyd. And you can remember Clemsoning was still a thing when Taj Boyd was a quarterback there. They lost that game to West Virginia where they gave up like 75 points with, I think, Taj Boyd as the quarterback. And that may be what's around the corner. But a 10-4 season right now, losing a bowl game, or 10-3 season, losing a bowl game in an embarrassing fashion would be a welcome change for Florida right now. And so certainly if Lagway can deliver that, then that's where the hope lies.
All Texas A&M's coming into the swamp September 14th. You got, of course, we're opening the season with Miami. I think Samford is sandwiched in between there. Miami on the August 31st, Samford on September 7th, and then so 3 straight home games at least to open the season next year. A&M comes in. A&M hires Mike Elko from Duke, the former Texas A&M defensive coordinator, who spent 4 of Jimbo's 6 years in College Station, and that's the guy that's going to fix it. Well, I like Elko a lot. I think he was awesome at Duke, but you paid $75 million to get rid of a guy, to hire a guy that had been there for 4 of the 6 seasons that the guy who you fired was there for. So what? Explain that one to me. Make that one make sense. He's going to modernize the offense or whatever. Yeah. But that's a lot of money to bring in a guy who was on staff with Jimbo Fisher.
I'd be making Steve Adazio for offensive coordinator jokes here at Florida if that was sort of the approach that they
I want
took.
to
Right?
first see that we're not going to hire him for offensive coordinator before I make any jokes. So let's make sure we're not going to hire him first, and then we'll start making those jokes.
Wow. Look, I mean, college football is ridiculous at this point in terms of the amount of money that flies around for the coaches. It's one of the reasons why I don't get bent out of shape when it comes to NIL and these guys transferring. I mean, look, every single kid at Texas A&M should have the opportunity and the right to go wherever he wants to go at this point. And honestly, probably even hold on to the money that they were given or promised under NIL auspices there at Texas A&M. It's a completely different coach. And, you sit there and you look at it, you go, God, this guy's got a $95 million contract. He'll be here for all 4 years I'm there, no doubt. And people get antsy and fire him. And the reality is there's 3 elite teams in terms of recruiting, and everybody else is sort of fighting for table scraps. Now, Napier has gotten Florida into that conversation. He's not quite there yet, but he's getting them into that conversation. And so, to me, the recruiting is still the thing that makes me hold on. If he was recruiting like Dan Mullen right now, I'd tell you, there's not really any hope. But the guys they've got in the fold, if they can get them to commit for early signing day, if they can bring in a guy like Seton, if they can maybe flip a guy like Jeremiah Smith from Ohio State, I don't know how realistic that is. But if you can bring in that sort of talent, then all of a sudden I'm looking at it going, the way to judge Napier is not whether the team looks good on the field. It's whether that 2025 class looks the same as the 2024 one. And then you're talking about having a level of talent where the on-field stuff doesn't matter because you're winning games by 25 points as opposed to having to get every single thing right. And look, I mean, Florida State wasn't without air in this game. And even when we played Georgia wasn't without air, but they're so much better than Florida that Florida has to be without air. And that's really, I think, where the program needs to get eventually. But in terms of short-term turnaround, it's all about Lagway, man. Always has been.
I think we need to start analyzing recruiting classes the same way NFL draft guys analyze NFL drafts. They say give it 3 years. Give it 3 years, let it simmer, let it cook. Then you analyze what actually happened in that draft. That's what recruiting is turning into. 2026, let me know how this 24 class turned out, because it's going to look a lot different. If you go back and look at the 21, 22, and the 2018 through 2021 classes, not a lot of those guys are sitting on this roster today. So it's just a different world of college football today. So I know the common saying is like, yeah, don't get excited about recruits until they sign on the dotted line. It might have to be don't get excited until they get to their junior year. Is that what we're going to have to start saying? Well, like they're going to either come in, because I still think as freshmen, you're not making. You look at a guy like Eugene Wilson. Would you say that guy has an NFL future just seeing his talent level?
Sure.
Yeah, that guy looks like a clear-cut dude that's going to be playing in the NFL one day. He's not the type of player today that he will be in 2 seasons.
Well, so I mean,
So
look, I think
even the most talented freshmen take a minute to make a real impact on the game that you need to if you want to be winning at a high level. And so that's what, like, we need a bunch of guys like Wilson. We need Wilson accelerating and playing like that experienced player on the field, and that takes time. And with NIL, with people jumping around, man, it's tough to keep that stuff together. It shouldn't be at Florida though. At Florida, you should be able to keep your dudes at Florida. I feel bad for more. We talked about the Wake Forest of the world. Those are
look,
the
man,
teams that are going to suffer.
if Florida was 18-6 over the last 2 years, I'd tell you Napier has all sorts of time. People need to be quiet. But Florida is 11-13. And at the end of the day, this is a results-oriented business and a hope business. Like we've talked about that a lot, that recruiting is about hope. And you better be selling some hope if you're going 11-13. And I said this on I was on Ali Pitt's podcast yesterday, and one of the things I said is my enduring memory from that Florida State game is going to be that I'm on the concourse hearing the war chant with my son on the way out of the building. And that is an enormous withdrawal that Billy Napier just took from a goodwill perspective with his fan base, with the boosters, and probably with his players as well. That stadium was full of Florida State folks. Florida fans sold a lot of their tickets because they didn't want to come and see their team lose. And we can criticize the fans for giving up their tickets that way. I think that's a justifiable opinion as well. At the same time, like, that's the image, as your stadium at the end of the game got overtaken by the Seminoles. They came out and dug up a piece of sod off of your field. Your team's 11-13 in 2 years. And if you look at the record against SEC teams, they're 6-10. And if you look at the record against Power 5 teams, it's even worse. Stuff has to start turning around. Like I'm all for giving people time. I think it makes sense. I think we can look at rosters and say, oh yeah, it should be better than it is, all that sort of stuff. But this defense has been the worst defense in the SEC for 2 straight years. Yep. There's no excuse for it. And so if you want to tell me that people need time and that Trey Wilson needs time to be who he's going to be, yeah, I'll agree with you on that. But how about the juniors and the seniors who are on the team who have struggled in those roles? Like, shouldn't they be developing? Like you mentioned Norvell
all 6 of them.
Well, you developed Jordan Travis. You're telling me, you're sitting here going, well, Norvell developed Jordan Travis. He developed him. That's why they are where they are. We got to give him credit for that. Well, then don't we have to give the same demerit to the staff that comes in and can't develop or hasn't developed the guys who are older, or allowed all these guys to leave? So guys like Tyron Hopper, Antoine Powell-Ryland, Powell Ryland's going to be the freaking defensive player of the year in the ACC for Virginia Tech. Chatfield has a ton of sacks up with Oregon State. Like, there are a bunch of guys who've left the program who have gone on to excel elsewhere. The guys who've stayed in the program have not. I think at some point you got to look and say, I at least need to be concerned. Like, I'm not going to sit there and just be like, you have to be patient. You have to give this guy 11-13 sucks. And irrespective of the reasons, it sucks. And the fans are right to say it sucks. And I'm not going to criticize somebody who says I have real concerns, because I have them too.
No, I think there's multiple areas to be concerned about. Absolutely. There's a difference between being concerned and looking at, like, right now, if you fired Billy Napier right now, who are you hiring, Will?
I mean, it's an unfair question from the stamp.
It's a bullshit question though, because people just say fire a guy, and it's like, okay, we should go get coach number 1. Okay, he's not coming. Coach number 2, he's not coming. Coach number 3. That's how you end up with Jim McElwain. That's how you end up with Jim McElwain. So it's
what my answer is. My answer is Urban. Like, that's who you go get.
Again,
you go get Urban.
People will say Urban Meyer. Is that happening? Probably not. So it's
that'd be such an awesome homecoming.
It's nice to say something. It's nice to say something. It's another thing for it to happen.
Well, so here
you look at Napier's profile, and he's the type of guy that you would give the time to, that you would invest in. I know the results haven't been there. Look, I've been super disappointed with the discipline on the field. I have been super disappointed with the special teams. The little parts of the game we do not do well, and that is a sign of good coaching. And like, I think Napier and his staff have to do much better in those areas. And I think there's real reason for concern. And I'm not even trying to sell anyone on it. But what I'm saying is, we've seen this cycle of hire, fire 3-4 years. When do we give a guy like just 4 or 5 and we just sit like I hate this too. I hate going 5-7, Will, but you have to at some point do something different, right?
Well, so no. So let me ask you, and because this is a thought experiment. Um, do you believe that coaches excel, um, that winning coaches win right off the bat? Like that year two things turn around for guys who win championships. Is that inherent, or is it that we fire people so quickly that we never get to actually see that quote unquote next Saban because we've just been so quick on the trigger that you never find him?
So give me like a Steve Sarkisian. How that man lost to Kansas at home in year 2, I believe. Was that year
Yeah.
2 or year 1? I think
Well,
it was
so
year.
but he went something
No, it was
like
year 1. He lost to Kansas at home.
5-7, then he went 8-5, and now he's what, 11-1.
Yeah, yeah.
So eight and
There's
five is a
progress.
hell of a lot better than 5-7 in year two.
That's true. That's true. And he recruited very well since the
It's
moment
also
he
his second
stepped in.
Power Five job, and he lost the first one not because of performance, but because of alcoholism.
Third
So,
Power 5 job, right?
yeah, third.
USC,
That
right?
well, where was
Like USC Washington. He started at Washington.
that's right.
He was
That's
the
right. Third.
OC. Him and Kiffin were like the duo
That's right.
under Pete Carroll at USC. Yeah,
So,
Sark though got off to a rough start at Texas for sure, and it wasn't 2 seasons; it was 1, like you said. But off top, Mike Norvell, perfect example. Billy Napier, right now, if you go to this point in the timeline of the Mike Norvell era, it wasn't for sure that Norvell was going to get a run at his money there. I thought Napier, though, you look at those Louisiana teams, and this is the part I've been disappointed with. There were well-coached teams out of Louisiana that played some good football, good, clean football. I know you can point to some different things. I think I saw a thing on Twitter today where a guy was reaming Napier because he took a safety that made it a 3-point game late in the game against Appalachian State for Louisiana. I didn't understand that call at all either. Okay, fine. So you could go back and find calls that you don't like from Napier. You can do that with any coach. But I thought we were going to have a cleaner, more organized team on the field. I thought that we would see like less penalties. I thought we'd see clean special teams. I was totally expecting that out of Napier. I've been disappointed by that so far. And at this point, one of the things you look at, we talk about the recruiting. That was something a few years ago. Most of our fans, I was in this club too, where it's like, hey, yeah, Kirby's great at recruiting and he's great at not starting his 5-star quarterbacks. That's awesome. And Dan Mullen can start a 4-star kid and make him look like a 5-star kid. So you can get him to play like that. Hey, if you're just a recruiter and not the game day guy, Kirby's proven that he could build so much talent that you can be solid at both. I think Kirby has done an excellent job. But you look at a guy right now like Mario Cristobal down in Miami. Everyone knows he's a hell of a recruiter. I think they just flipped the 5-star defensive lineman that's been recruited, that's been committed to Ohio State since July and out of Chicago, I think. And now he's coming down to Miami. Flipped the kid earlier tonight on Wednesday night here. Mario, though, the kneel with Georgia Tech this year, the lack of kneeling, I should say, at the end of the game, where you could have just run the clock out, but you choose to run the football. The criticism on Mario is that great recruiter, not a great game day coach. Like, is Billy Napier a less caffeinated Mario Cristobal right now? Is that something we're going to have to wrestle with going into the offseason here? But I guess I'm just giving a taste of the type of show we'll do. We'll break down the 2023 season on the next episode, and we'll look into these questions a little deeper. But these are the questions I'm walking away with from the 2023 season as well.
I mean, I guess so. After the 2022 season, I said, and really one of the things I said after the 2022 recruiting class was that there were a lot of questions about Napier. And I think after 2 seasons, we've got quite a few answers. Some of those answers are good, especially on the recruiting front. Some of those answers are not good in terms of what we're seeing on the field. And the thought experiment that I posed to you is something we'll eventually talk about, I'm sure probably next week, which is that, are you better off cycling coaches every 3 years if it gives you an opportunity to potentially hit on the elite guy if you believe there's only a limited number of elite guys out there? Or are you better off sitting there and building for 6, 7, 8, 9 years until that elite guy presents himself that is a can't miss, and then you go get him? Now, the question there is, who's the last guy who was an elite guy who got brought in as a can't miss guy? I would say it's Urban going to Ohio State. I would say Kirby is about as close, but he was a defensive coordinator at Alabama. People wondered whether that was a hindrance, right? You think about Urban coming from Utah. People wondered whether that was not like a can't miss hire. Now, obviously, he was in demand, but that wasn't a can't miss hire. In fact, I would say the last quote unquote can't miss hire that was made was Jimbo, Texas A&M, where they sniped him away from Florida State and said, things have soured in Tallahassee, but that he'll be able to turn us around. We'll give him all the money that he wants, and we'll go from there. And it turns out that can't miss guy isn't always a can't miss guy. Now they're on to Elko. Maybe Elko ends up being better than Jimbo. But
And
the
they
idea
gave
that
Jimbo 6 years out of A&M, by the way.
yeah,
They gave
so
him, they were very patient with Jimbo, and it was the same story year in and year out. That's plenty of time. I guess what I worry about? My concern is this. My concern is that the noise is going to get ratcheted to a point. I feel like we're one click away from being Tennessee. We're one click away from being Tennessee, where you're just cycling through guys, and all of a sudden, like, do you feel like Josh Heupel's a guy that's going to lead Tennessee to a national championship? Or is he just like, he's got a great offense, he's a good coach, he's doing better than any coach has done there in a decade and a half, and he's going to keep his job for a little bit because of that, but they'll get tired of that act eventually. It's not a long-term proposition at Tennessee, because you keep cycling through guys. Eventually find the guy you want to invest in a little bit and stick with it. And that's,
well, they gave Butch Jones a
could be
few
wrong
years
on that theory. I'm sure there's plenty of people right now who disagree with me, but
they gave Butch Jones a few years there at Tennessee, and I think Tennessee has some inherent disadvantages compared to Florida. I think Phil Fulmer was sort of the second fiddle to Steve Spurrier most of the time he was there. Now, obviously, Fulmer wins a national title, but and that's the other thing is I think that Tennessee fans might tell you that there's value in being patient, but Fulmer was also winning SEC titles. It wasn't like he was he was the Elmer Fudd to Spurrier, but at the same time, like, they were actually winning and winning significantly.
they were a top 10 team.
They just couldn't get over that Florida hump. If Florida was a top 10 team and it's like, we just can't get over the hump, I wouldn't be sitting there going, well, people are right to be questioning Billy Napier. Florida didn't in a freaking bowl game. And we just watched that Swamp Kings documentary where Urban Meyer said he was about to like jump off a cliff when he lost 3 SEC games his first year at Florida. 3 SEC games, not 3 games. And then all of a sudden wins a national title in year 2. The reality is, you look back at the SEC history, and Bill Sykes written about this a lot. You look at the SEC history, and that jump in wins from year 1 to year 2 for all the guys who've won SEC championships is significant. We just saw a regression in terms of win-loss for Billy Napier. I think there's plenty of reason to be concerned. And, to sit here and pretend like there isn't, I think is disingenuous for me. Now, what I will say is that I think there are a lot of things in college football that are different than have been historical, and I'm willing to entertain the fact that there are opportunities for outliers from those sorts of things in the past. But he's gonna have to prove it, right? I mean, he's gonna have to prove it, and he's gonna have to prove it essentially with Lagway. Like, Lagway's gonna have to go out there and win some games and win and throw some missiles around, and we're gonna have to see it. And maybe we see that, and Napier's here for a really long time. I hope that's the case. But to sit here and go, I'm certain that he's going to be the guy and he's going to lead us forward, I don't think I can say that definitively.
I don't think anyone can say that. I don't think anybody can say they're certain. And I sound like I'm defending Napier himself. Hey, Napier's got to prove it. This is the University of Florida. He's got to go out there and prove it. I absolutely believe that. You put if the defense looks like it did in 2024, like it did this really since 2020. I keep saying that because that's true. But if the defense makes no improvement in 2024, which you and I have been joking behind the scenes that, like, we got to stop saying it can't get worse, because it definitely can. It definitely can get worse. There's no floor on this, it seems like, but it needs to get better. If you put on, I feel like we've been stuck in Groundhog Day with our football team since that shoe was thrown. It's like curse of the shoe. And until we get out of this cycle, until we see some real improvement, especially on the defensive side of the ball, if you come out next year, you got a scrappy defense. Lagway looks like the dude. It's promising. Maybe the record's not where you want it 100%, but there's some real promise there. I do think that 2025 is definitely happening. I think that 2024, though, you have to really show some marked improvement by the end of the season.
Yeah, I think so. Look, we got a lot of time to talk about this. Florida and Billy Napier have given us a lot of time to talk about this. So All I want to say to wrap things up is go Louisville.
Yeah, knock them out, man. Let's ruin that. Let's ruin that season. I'd be go Cards. Go Cards. All right. Got carried away at the end there, but there's a lot to talk about. Well, we're just heading in off-season mode. For those of you that stuck around, we appreciate your time. For everybody else, we'll be here week in and week out every offseason like we always are for Will Miles. I'm Nick Knudsen. Have a great week, everybody, and go Gators.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to Stand Up and Holler. If you're interested in more information from me and Nick, you can go over to readandreaction.com. You can like and subscribe our YouTube channel here at Read and Reaction, or you can go to patreon.com/readandreaction to support us, get extra information, and we do Ask Anythings over there every once in a while as well. So check us out. Thanks for listening.